Welcome to the VO School podcast, dedicated to the art, craft, and business of voiceover. Each week builds upon the last to give you a comprehensive understanding of a career in VO. My name's Jamie Muffett. I'm a full-time voice talent and audio engineer, and I'll be joined by some of the industry's top professionals on both sides of the microphone to drill down and dig up the truth. Hello, welcome to the VO School podcast. Today's episode is devoted entirely to microphones, so please excuse us if we get a little geeky. All three of us have somewhat of an unhealthy obsession with microphones, so I think that will probably come across. Before we get to the interview, we've got a few bits of housekeeping to do. For all the links to the social media and the places where you can listen to the podcast, visit our website, which is voschoolpodcast.com. And please do follow us on our social media because it is the best place to stay up to date on all that we're doing. And it's a good way to get in touch if you have any questions or suggestions. Other than that, I think that's pretty much everything. So without further ado, here's a quick ad and our interview with Emmett Andrews and Dan Friedman.
The National Zoo. Because sometimes you just need to stroke a llama.
Instagram. Download it and start embarrassing your teenagers today.
Resolve spot and stain. Because the dog's gonna drag his butt on the carpet. He just is.
Engage the droid army with this LEGO Star Wars Republic fighter tank.
Hi, it's J. Michael Collins, and these are just a few examples of the first-class demos my team and I are producing. If you'd like to have something similar, visit jmcvoiceover.com and click on the Demo Production tab to find out more.
Dan Friedman is an audio engineer, producer, voice talent, and author from the mountains of Asheville, North Carolina. With nearly 2 decades in the voiceover industry, he's produced, directed, or provided his voice to thousands of audio productions. In 2010, he published Sound Advice, Voiceover from an Audio Engineer's Perspective. A first of its kind in the industry, the book covers audio engineering and studio session etiquette as it relates directly to voiceover talent. He continues to write a popular blog at his website, soundforvo.com. Emmett Andrews' background includes over 20 years in commercial radio. Additionally, he's worked for Sweetwater as both a sales engineer and tech support specialist. He is also a national voice talent, with clients like Dell, Long John Silver's, Spalding, Lexus, and Pandora. He offers technical design services for home studio owners and ad agencies. Emmett currently serves as production director for MS Communications. Here's our interview with Dan Friedman and Emmett Andrews. All right, so today I am joined by Dan Friedman and Emmett Andrews, who are both audio engineers, and that's specifically in the field of VO. So welcome to you both.
Hey, Jamie, thanks.
Thanks for having us.
Pleasure. And today we are talking about microphones. And I want to kick off by zooming out and looking very broadly at the subject. And there are essentially three main groups of microphones, and those groups can be subdivided further, and we'll look at that a bit later. But I want to talk about the three main groups and the differences between them right now. So those groups are USB, dynamic, and condenser microphones. So, Emmett, why don't you give us a little outline of those three types of microphones?
All right, so I'm going to add in a fourth one, too, just so we cover the bases, but I won't go too in-depth. So USB microphones can be either dynamic or condenser, but basically they have the electronics of a preamp and an interface all built into the casing of that microphone. So it's a lot of stuff crammed into a really small little place, but at the same time, it's all self-contained, so that's all there is. You plug it in, and generally it just sort of works. Dynamic microphones and condenser microphones, you're going to have something external to get those into the computer, usually a preamp and an interface, either separate or built into one unit. Dynamic microphones work on strictly an acoustic principle with the transducer, where vibrations are making all the voltage. Condensers, they get a little extra power externally, so they're more sensitive. And then the fourth category would be ribbon mics, which a lot of people think of as the old kind of microphone, and they've kind of had a resurgence, but that's a little folded piece of foil, accordion-style folded piece of foil that vibrates, and you don't see those a whole lot, and usually the people using those have other mics in their collection because they're just sort of a specialized thing.
Yeah.
Did I miss anything with there? Any gaping holes in that?
Feels good to me.
Yeah. So Dan, why would you choose one over another in that sort of 3 or 4?
Well, first of all, let's talk about, dynamic mics are very versatile, built like tanks. They're often used in radio stations. They are used on instruments, great microphones. But because of their mechanical nature in the way that they pick up sound, they generally need a little bit more sound pressure level in order to reach their full potential. So in other words, the source sound has to be kind of loud, or you have to work the mic really up close to make that work. So that's not always ideal for what we do in voiceover, because often a voiceover read is barely over a whisper. It could just be right down in here, right? So a dynamic microphone is not going to perform as well as a condenser microphone, which works electronically to capture sound. Now, as a ribbon microphone, because that's typically going to be bidirectional or figure 8 in its polar pattern, that introduces room noise and things of that nature. So that can be problematic. So that's why we tend to not use those unless we have a really good treated room. And they're also very delicate. And then the USB microphone, that's just newer technology, and there's not nearly as many choices out there as there are in any of these other types that we've been using for decades. So that would really be the reason why we tend to, gravitate towards the large diaphragm condenser first and foremost in voiceover.
Yeah, and you get a wider frequency response from the large diaphragm condenser mics. They're more sensitive, so it can represent reality better and sometimes enhance things, as opposed to a dynamic, like you say, that require a bit more input.
Yeah, I mean, if you're putting a dynamic microphone on a drum set or on a guitar cabinet or something like that, you're certainly not going to have any problem getting the power you need from those instruments to really get a great sound from them. On the other hand, like I said, because voiceover, sometimes it's just right down in here, right? Or just barely over a whisper. A dynamic microphone just isn't going to pick that up nearly as well. Yeah.
So let's talk price points then with these. Are we talking sort of USB are cheap, dynamic are in the middle, and condenser are more expensive? Or is it that straightforward, or is it more of a mixture?
I think it's a mixture at this point, because while USB microphones, in my experience, and I recently did a big mic shootout with several USB microphones, not all of them were the cheapest. So it's becoming more of a mix for sure. But on the other hand, there are certainly, you can certainly get, for goodness sakes, the Shure SM58 and 57, those are dynamic microphones that are less than $100.
Right.
Not good for voiceover per se, but, inexpensive. On the other hand, we know certainly that we can spend $5,000 or $10,000 on a really high quality large diaphragm condenser microphone. Now, that's not really necessary for what we do. It's just not necessary. And then the USB microphones, generally, they have been lower cost because of the way we use them, usually on portable devices. And, that's kind of the intention, I think, and why they started really producing them, so people can plug them into their phones, use them on their iPads, and that's just a clunky, more unprofessional way of recording anyway, but it can get the job done. But they are getting better quality. Of the mics that I tested in the USB shootout, the Sennheiser MK4 was their non-USB version of that microphone is actually less expensive than the USB version of that same microphone.
Right, yeah.
So price points, it's becoming a little bit more scattered in that way. And not only that, but, you can get a lot of really great sounding large diaphragm condenser microphones, at a fairly reasonable price point.
I'm wondering if you think that it's just a matter of time before we see like a U87 USB mic. And for the listeners at home, a U87 is a large diaphragm condenser mic that is sort of ubiquitous in most recording studios.
And also very expensive.
Yes.
Around the $3,000 price point in the U.S.
Yeah.
And I would say no, and here's the reason why. It's not because I don't think the technology can be good enough. I do. I think the technology can be outstanding, but the people who are going to be purchasing mics at that level, I would say 1,000 on up, they're going to want the freedom that comes with a mic that's not a USB mic, because they can pair the preamp individually. They can choose their converters. If one piece fails, they can quickly swap in another piece, just the piece that fails. It's just generally a more professional solution all around from a practicality standpoint to not use a USB microphone. Not saying you can't do professional work with a USB microphone, but if you're doing it day in, day out, it's a tool like you would find in any other job, and USB microphones are just a very simple tool, like a multi-tool. Yeah. Whereas if you go see a mechanic's not going to do much with a multi-tool. He or she will have an entire range of specialty tools so they can choose exactly the right piece for what they need.
I totally agree with that. And that's actually also a really good, way to illustrate that, comparison. Absolutely.
So I'd like to go ahead and maybe bust a few myths right now. Now, my first statement/question here is, do you need an expensive mic to work professionally? And you both touched upon that a little while ago. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
The microphone, to me, is the third most important thing in the chain. So, you don't have to have an expensive microphone to work professionally. What you really need is the ability to deliver and communicate copy effectively, first and foremost. Yeah. Then you need a space, an environment that can also work in a, can sound professional. Yeah. Because the microphone is really the third most important thing in that chain. So, if you were to give a lower quality microphone to somebody who's been doing this for 20 years, and they can probably get a pretty good sound out of it, and they'll still be able to communicate that message effectively to where, there's a reason why some people, when they're on the road, travel with a little Apogee USB mic, and actually some of the things that they do go to air with that microphone. And it's because they know what they're doing. So, that's the real issue lies is that when newer people to the business think that they can get away with a cheaper, less expensive microphone, they quickly realize that, they think it's a cheap microphone, but it's not really that part of it that's making them less effective. It's that they haven't had all the other stuff in between and a good quality room to work in.
Yeah, and would it be fair to say that the microphone in that list of three is a distant third as well, behind those first two? I mean, it's a long way down compared to the room and the performance. But sorry, Emmett, you were going to pick up on something.
As both of you know, and I think a lot of people know, I'm a big proponent of using quality gear. But as far as being absolutely necessary, not at all. The highest paying voice job I've ever done was a mic that I would never have chosen for myself if I had another option. So it's much more about the work and the performance, the room that it's in. At the same time, a good mic behind a good room and a good performance can make that performance easier, or allow it to come through better, I guess is probably a better way to put it.
Shine.
Right. A great mic doesn't make a great performance. It will capture a bad performance or a good performance. But with all things created equal, if the performance is great, a great mic will capture it a little bit better.
There's a lot of hyperbole about the difference between an expensive mic and a cheap mic. I wonder is there any way to articulate in practice how much of an improvement, getting that U87 plugged in versus like an NT1, how much of an improvement that's going to make? Because it's not as much of a difference as a lot of people think it is.
It's pretty interesting. I feel like that in the last decade or so, we've seen a proliferation of lower cost microphones that do sound really good from major manufacturers, in addition to boutique manufacturers and guys who also will mod, cheaper microphones into more expensive sounding microphones.
Yeah.
So my feeling is that, you can certainly find, if you're willing to put in the time and the search and use your ears to find the right combination. There are plenty of microphones out there that are around the $300 price point or so that you're not necessarily going to notice $700 worth of difference between that microphone and a $1,000 microphone.
Yeah.
There might be some differences, some subtle differences, but it may not be worth $700 of difference.
I agree completely, and I guess that $700 difference depends hugely on where you are in your career and how important those fine details are to you. There's the law of diminishing returns. The more you spend, the less the improvement. And once you get above a certain level, it just becomes about the flavor that you like or that your engineer likes, or even which one you think is the prettiest hanging in your room, because they're all very, very good.
Yeah.
And not to mention the fact that, guys like Emmett and myself and, we listen to microphones all day long, or certainly have, and we listen to, in a very critical listening environment, whereas most of the things that end up on air are being listened to by people who don't care what the difference is, in how much you spent on a microphone. And they don't notice the difference between the two. And they're also listening on computer speakers or earbuds or in their car or on the television speakers, so they're not really paying attention. Now, one thing that I can certainly tell you from having, worked on some video projects and film projects is, people are willing to forgive, some poor quality video, but they tend not to forgive poor quality sound. So that is something that is important to keep in mind, because if something sounds bad, it's really hard to listen to and to maintain their attention, for a long period of time. Whereas if something is kind of poor video quality but has great sound, they'll still watch.
Yeah, yeah.
And that drives me crazy sometimes that, for instance, as we progress along in, bandwidth and speed and things like that, a lot of companies have been focused on, getting better video quality. It's been a lot more recent than people have actually cared more about getting better sound quality.
Yeah, and it always blows my mind when you'll see an ad or, you work on a project where they've clearly spent hundreds of thousands on the live action shoot of this thing, and then the voiceover or the audio components are the very last thing they think about. But exactly like you say, the audio is so much more important in some respects than the visuals in terms of people's appreciation of it. Now, this is a bit of a leading question, to be honest, and a lot of these questions are, but is an expensive mic always going to be a better option for your voice? Emmett, what do you think?
Not necessarily, no. And I think everyone would agree with that. There's one aspect I wanted to touch on that sort of ties into that and sort of ties into the previous part.
Yeah.
And that is that for some people, not everyone, maybe not even a majority, but for some people, there's confidence in using what other people are using. There's confidence in knowing that you are using the same mic that some hero of yours or some pro that you admire is using. And if that gets you more into your performance, if that allows you to think less about the mic, blame the mic less, and just sort of forget that it's there, then I would say that's absolutely worth the investment.
Right.
For a lot of people, they're able to just simply focus on the performance and not worry about what microphone is there. And in that case, it doesn't necessarily come down to price, though. There are a lot of factors in there. I think if you put a U87 clone next to a U87, the U87 is going to beat it every time. So when all things are, when we're actually comparing apples to apples, price is usually going to win, but frequently it's not exactly apples to apples, and there may be certain things about one mic that make it more appealing than another mic on a certain voice. Yeah. The Sennheiser 416 is used all the time, and it's a third the price of a U87, and many times it's a better choice.
I know that when I did my last promo demo, I had a TLM 103 and my 416 both in the booth with me, and we chose the 416 over the TLM 103. Yeah. That's just how it shook out. And actually, since you mentioned comparison, Emmett, I think that, that's the thing that's so critical. I describe, choosing a microphone a lot like going to the eye doctor. You sit in the chair and you look across the room and you read the chart, right? And the eye doctor puts the lens up in front of you and says, okay, you're going for how do you read that most accurately and with the most clarity? And choosing a microphone should be kind of have the same goal. And ideally, if you can, kind of choose in the same way, because the eye doctor puts that lens in front of you, you read the chart, and then they flip the lens and say, okay, is this better or worse? And then they might do that 2 or 3 more times, right? Yeah. So ideally, if you can do the same thing and choose your microphone in that way, then you definitely have the confidence that hey, I tried this one and I tried that one and I tried this one all side by side, and this is the one that sounded best. And whatever that might end up being, it doesn't really – so much of this is subjective, and part of the reason that we just have so many microphones in the world is because we are literally trying to use those to create a different sound. When you're recording music – you might want to put a ribbon microphone on a guitar cabinet in addition to a dynamic microphone so that you can blend the two sounds together. Yeah. In voiceover, we don't really have much need to pick flavors of microphones for those reasons, unless you're really doing something that fits into the grand scheme of character read, or into, you want some kind of retro 50s sound, right? Then it might be worth having a microphone that suits that need, but it's pretty rare that we audition that way. And of course, our job really is auditioning to get the job, and getting a job is kind of gravy.
Exactly. I'm gonna quickly jump on one thing you mentioned there, Dan. And you didn't come right out and say it, but something I hear a lot that I actually don't agree with is that you should make a trip to the local music store and sit down with a bunch of microphones in front of you and pick which one you think sounds best. And the reason that I don't agree with that practice for most people is because most people don't have the ears trained enough to make that decision in the first place. Sure. And beyond that, they're not working in their own environment, and we know the environment makes more of a difference than the mic. So I'm a big proponent in getting with people who are doing this professionally, successfully, and finding out what has worked for a lot of people. The standards are a standard for a reason, and often, even if they're not the absolute best choice, they're usually not the wrong choice. You agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, ideally, if you are going to make that kind of blind comparison, it should be something that you do in your own booth at home. So it's not necessarily going out to a music store and doing it. And of course, I realize that presents some challenges. But ideally, if you can do that in your own home and then, or in your own home studio, and then most of the time when I have done shootouts, people are sending me files that they've recorded in their own home studio, and I'll listen to them on this end, and they won't tell me what microphone it is, and I will choose.
Exactly right. Yeah. Getting the expert ears upon that, I think, is an important component to choosing that right set of that right set of glasses to match your analogy.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, you're going to be listening to that, like you said, in an acoustically treated room with good monitors and things like that. And potentially in an environment in a similar way to possibly future clients that you as a voice actor will work with. So whereas you may hear yourself on your own headphones, that's not necessarily how your clients are going to listen to you in the future. So getting that analysis is absolutely crucial. I completely agree.
Yeah, it's really the recorded sound, that's where you do the shootout part. Is to really, after you record it onto a computer of some kind, laptop or whatever, even if you bring a little Tascam or have a little Tascam thing with you because you haven't bought anything yet, I mean, whatever, or you're at somebody else's studio. Listen back to the recorded sound, and that's where you make the decision, not as you're listening to it in headphones necessarily.
Sure.
So the real goal with a lot of microphone manufacturers is that they produce a mic that gives you a relatively flat response. So it's going to be even. It doesn't give you any bumps on the frequency spectrum. So it represents the sound that's being pumped into it. It can reproduce that as naturally and realistically as possible. But then there are other mics that you may buy for certain characteristics. And that's why people fetishize older mics, tube mics and things like that. But you can actually research these frequency responses online before you actually even go into the store.
I recommend that all the time. I definitely think that frequency response charts are a really helpful tool. It's not going to give you obviously it's like looking at a studio monitor in a picture. You can look at these different speakers and you can say, oh, that one's pretty, You can look at the frequency response chart and it's going to give you somewhat of an idea of what you can expect it to sound like. But, generally speaking, one of the things about, for instance, a TLM 103 that I like compared to the Rode is that the frequency response chart on a TLM 103 has a bump at around 3.5. That's where it starts to rise. Whereas the Rode NT1A has a bump around 1K. Now, to me, 1K is not a pleasant sound, so it's just a personal preference. I know a lot of people use that mic and they use it successfully. However, it's not a pleasant sound to my ear. So I prefer the TLM 103 over that because I know at 3.5, 3.0 or 3.1, that's a pleasant frequency where the voice starts to come alive, whereas 1K is just a little squawky sounding to me. So, just like anything else, there's also some subjectivity by the listener as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And funnily enough, we were saying about the shotgun mics earlier, the 416, I just can't get on with them, if I'm perfectly honest. It just doesn't work for my voice. There's something about the range of my voice. I mean, it's fine. It would totally do the job. But if I had the choice between a large diaphragm condenser and a shotgun, I would always go for the LDC. But that's just unique to my space, my voice. So I'd like to move on now real quick to mic technique. So I'd like to talk a little bit about that because it makes a huge difference to the end product. So Emmett, why don't we just talk a little bit now about that and what you can do to optimize your sound with technique?
I'll start with a little story. I was working with a guy maybe a decade ago. It's been a while. But he was using a Neumann TLM 103.
Yeah.
And we tweaked it. We got the settings dialed in pretty well. And his promo came on TV and it aired during the Super Bowl. And just compared to everything around him, he sounded very small. And he had also done a lot of stuff for a bunch of network promos, and they were kind of coming out the same way. But he had done a whole series of those and was continuously doing them, so we could tweak actually based on what we were hearing come across TV week to week and make our adjustments that way.
That's great.
And it turned out to be, it wasn't a settings issue at all. He was a radio guy, and he had that thing right in front of his mouth and was just talking straight into the diaphragm, and it just laid there. And when we gave it about 5-6 inches of space and kind of lifted it above his head a little bit, pointing down towards him, it came alive. He sounded worlds better. And so that's just an example of placement and working with the mic, how important that is and how much of a difference it can make. If you don't like the sound, it may not be that there's a problem with the mic or a problem with you. It's a problem with the space between you. And so it's really, really important to sit down and take the time to try different positions and see how things come across to get the most out of any mic. Shotguns are pretty straightforward for the most part. You're shooting right into the barrel, because if you're not, it's going to have trouble picking you up. With those, it's just about finding the right angle, the angle that picks up your chest resonance, if that's important to you. But large diaphragm condensers, I've seen them perform best at more than a foot away from time to time. Yeah. And I've seen some that perform best really close mic'd. And so it just really depends on the person and on the mic where that placement is.
Yeah, I kind of think of the it's so funny. I came up with a baseball analogy, which of course is silly to me because I don't really like baseball. I don't, not that I don't like it, but I don't watch it very much. But I kind of consider it like you've got a strike zone, where you would place the microphone, and it's basically the top of it is at your eye level, right at your eyes, and then the lower end of it is like kind of right at your clavicle. And basically like inside that square on either side from left to right, that microphone could fit anywhere in that space, pointed at your mouth, 6 to 8 inches away usually, and kind of off axis. So you're not going to speak directly into it anyway, but it could fit anywhere in that space, and you should try those kind of 4 corners and somewhere in the middle. And, the reason why it might sound a little bit different on the left or the right kind of goes back to the environment. Because if you actually have something different going on the left side than you have on the right side, which of course in a professional recording studio, it's probably going to be a little bit more symmetrical. In your own home studio, it could be much more haphazard. So, try anywhere inside that strike zone, so to speak, and the placement, will definitely alter the sound.
Yeah, and one thing to consider, and particularly probably this was relevant to Emmett, your example a minute ago, is the proximity effect. If you get closer generally to a mic in pretty much any pickup pattern with the exception of Omni, you will get a low boost if you get closer, and you'll lose that low end the further away from it. So you can almost EQ yourself in real time. The other thing is plosives and avoiding blowing out the mic. So what are they and how can we avoid them?
Sure. So I'll answer first. Plosives, that popping, thumping sound, pop, 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 pop. Maybe you got some there. Yeah. That we want to avoid that for sure. It's, a pain to have to edit that out all the time. And it's just not something it's just not good mic technique to have that happen. Now, obviously, voice actors, we use the microphone so many different ways. We might want to get up closer, and we might need to be further away based on our volume, and what it is that we're delivering. So we can be prone to plosives in all those situations. But good mic technique, first of all, regardless of the situation, certainly does help with that. Having a pop filter, in front of the microphone is certainly helpful with that too. Yeah. And how you have it placed, certainly helpful with that. Smile through the plosive, through the P's. That is a pretty good trick. That
I've heard that one.
When you're actually doing your voiceover stuff, if you just smile a little bit through the P, then it becomes less powerful. So that's a good trick you can do, and just be conscious of it. If you're Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers, right? It's kind of, you got to be kind of conscious of the P's, so that that you're not giving them as much power as the rest. And actually, because they are hard consonants anyway, you can afford to give them less power, and they will be okay. Yeah, they'll sit there just fine.
And this kind of cycles back to placement too. Getting that mic out of the direct line of what's coming out of your lips can really help with plosives a lot too. And there's a little bit of processing that can go into it too with things like high-pass filters that are on many preamps, and I keep them engaged on both of my preamps all the time because I can't stand plosives, and I got a fat bottom lip, so I'm genetically wired to have plosives.
Right.
Now, that's something I've never heard.
That's right.
Well, actually, this is a good opportunity to speak about this. What the hell are all the switches on the mics? What do they do?
Well, certainly not all mics have switches, but the ones that do often, for instance, like a U87 has different polar patterns, which you don't really need to be switching from back and forth. So cardioid is mostly what we're using in VoiceOver. Now, of course, back in the day, eons ago, it seems like now, when we would have two talent in the same booth speaking, doing a dialogue session together or something like that, then having a figure 8 polar pattern was great because they could work together and work off of each other and see each other as they were doing their thing. But, nobody's doing that anymore. It's very rare that anybody from home would ever have, another talent in their booth with them. So, we don't need those multiple polar patterns on our mics anymore. Other things are pads, which basically reduces the power of the microphone. So in other words, if it's minus 10 dB or it just says minus 10, then it's already attenuating that sound, that volume, by 10 decibels so that you can be louder without distorting the microphone. And then there's roll-off switches for bass roll-off, which Emmett just mentioned. What else? What else would be on there?
That's pretty much it, I think.
There's also on a few mics like the Shure SM7. There's a little presence boost switch. So you have a few that have a little more contour to them. The RE27ND has a few of those contour switches. I can't think of any condensers off the top of my head that have that option, but there are a few dynamics where you can kind of dial in the sound a little more on the mic. In my experience, in every case I've ever tested, it sounds better to do that either at the preamp level or in the post level than it does to use those switches on the mic.
Right.
I agree.
Well, following on from that, Emmett, I'd like you to talk now a little bit about the pairing and the sort of dance that a microphone and a preamp does with each other. Like, why would you choose a certain preamp with a certain microphone? And, how does that affect the eventual sound?
I'm actually gonna back up and go a little bit more basic than that for what a preamp actually is at its core level, which is just simply a device that takes the extremely low signal coming from a microphone and brings it up to a more usable level so we can work with it. In the most simple terms, that's what it's doing. In the process of doing that, every preamp has some impact on the sound. And I'm gonna bounce around a little bit here because there's this constant debate over which is more important, the microphone or the preamp, and a lot of people will say the preamp is more important. The reason where that line of thinking comes from is if you have half a dozen microphones and you get one really good preamp, you have improved all of those microphones.
Right.
Whereas if you buy one more microphone, you're just going to add one more sound. So that's where the line of thinking, where people have gotten this idea that the preamp is more important. I would say the opposite is true with VoiceOver, that the mic is the most important component, followed by the preamp, because it's all about the character, and generally you're not going to have a zillion sources that you're going to have to try and mic. You're going to have one voice that you're going to be working with. Anyhow, into your question, the dance that they do, there's a lot that goes into it, but different preamps have different voicings, just like different mics have different voicings, and they're not always obvious. Some are, like the Neve 1073. It's got a certain sound to it. You know that whatever you plug into it is going to take on that Neve sound, but most of them are much more subtle than that. And some preamps have a lot of color, a lot of character to them. Some are ultra transparent, and there's a whole wide range in between. and it's a matter of largely just finding what you like. Even the cheapest preamps now are pretty good. If you go in and buy a $100 interface, a $100 Steinberg interface, the preamps in that are not bad.
Yeah, not bad at all, actually. I recommend the Steinberg a lot. I think to me, the preamps are better than the Focusrite, for instance, in this comparably priced model. I agree. You can get really nice preamps that'll work just fine on voice alone, for sure.
It used to be back a couple decades ago, maybe the 90s or so, there was a wide difference between professional-grade preamps and low-end kind of plug-and-play preamps. And Mackie sort of changed the game on that because they were able to come up with a really solid-sounding preamp for a fraction of the cost of higher-end boutique preamps, and everyone has followed suit since then, and that technology has only gotten better and cheaper. I do still think there's reason to spend more on a preamp if you're at that level in your career and that level with your gear. There are still things you can get out of higher-end boutique preamps, but the differences are a lot more subtle than they used to be, and it's a lot less of a necessity because it used to be about noise, and at this point, pretty much they're all pretty quiet.
Right. So if you had a setup with, and I keep bringing it up, but let's say you've got an NT1 and you've got a 2i2 as your preamp / interface, would that be a significant jump up if you were to upgrade your mic and not upgrade the preamp, or do you have to do them concurrently?
Well, one of the things that you have to be aware of is, are you getting enough gain from your preamp without having to turn that all the way up? Because, as Emmett said, the preamp is designed to boost that extremely low signal coming from the mic. So, you want to have a preamp that you can boost that signal and get as much as you need and still have plenty more to go if you need more, i.e. headroom. So if you're having to turn your preamp all the way up, which is where honestly most of the noise comes from, is because that's like if you were to equate it with plumbing of any sort, it would be like the pump, that's pumping that signal or that water through your plumbing system, and that's the part that makes noise. A microphone can be extremely quiet, but when you add that preamp that has to pump that signal up, that's where the noise comes from. So if you're not getting enough gain out of the preamp that you have combined with the microphone that you have, then you might need to get a better preamp that allows you to get the signal that you need without adding noise, and allowing you to have more headroom available should you ever need it.
Right, great. So I'd like to just get on to a little bit of sort of maintenance, day-to-day kind of stuff. So how do you maintain your microphone day-to-day so that it has a nice long life, and how long should your microphone last?
I'll jump in on this one. I'm probably setting a terrible example here, but I don't do much of anything for maintenance with my mics. They're plugged in, they're powered at all times. I don't take them down, so that at any time I can walk into the booth and do my thing. Every couple weeks I'll come in with a Swiffer and dust off the top of them. I always use a pop filter to keep moisture out of the diaphragm, but beyond that, there's not a ton of maintenance that goes into it. And a good mic, well taken care of, with the exception of ribbons and tube mics, will last a long, long time. I mean, decades, eons. If you're not dropping it, you're not banging around. It's not your travel mic. It's set up in a studio and well cared for. There is no reason for it not to last almost indefinitely.
Yeah.
I mean, we do have to understand, a large diaphragm condenser microphone certainly is going to be more delicate than, say, they use shotgun microphones on film sets They travel with them. They mount to cameras. They get, dynamic microphones or, live on stages, which is, I spent the first third of my career doing live sound. I mean, these things get complete, drummers hit them with sticks and hard too, right? Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of that, microphones are actually pretty durable. So now large diaphragm condensers, the kind that we use most, of course, are more delicate, but we're also not using them in that same context. So, they're durable enough that, if you just really don't mess around with it too much, you don't drop it, you treat it, nicely, it's probably going to last you indefinitely. Now, obviously, tube microphones, it is better to leave them powered on, because that way, what happens is with tube gear of any kind, just like light bulbs, they often blow when you're turning power on or turning power off. Yeah. Light bulbs rarely burn out when they're just on. And they just don't go, they just don't blow when they're just on and running. It's that powering up and powering down that really puts a lot more strain on the electronics than anything else. So, I don't consider Emmett's to be a bad example at all, because honestly, I do pretty much the same thing. My mic just sits here and it's on, ready to go. And I travel with I use a 416 and I travel with it. But I know that it's durable. I know that I'm not going to, it's probably not going to really cause me any problems. I obviously make sure that the screws are tight on it and all of that stuff, and that the connection points are clean and things like that. But other than that, I don't really do a whole lot with it. And I actually do keep the windscreen on mine as well for that same reason. Yeah. To keep the moisture out and all of that.
Great. I'm the same. Glad to know that I'm in good company. All right. So indulge me on this final question before I get to audience questions. I'm just interested to know, what is your dream microphone, Emmett?
I'm a huge fan of the Telefunken 251 and many of its clones too. The Bach 251 is great also. And I hear the Peluso's cool, but I haven't used it. But there's something about that mic that just sounds really different to me than everything else out there. Right. And I've never been able to duplicate it with EQ. I've never been able to duplicate it in post. Something kind of magic about it. And so I'd love to have one of those hanging here.
Cool. What about you, Dan?
For me, when I was working in music, it mattered a lot more to me. And I used to fantasize about the AKG C1. That was just, to me, that was like the holy grail of microphones back when I was doing music. But now, I'm pretty happy with my 416, honestly. It just works well for me. And I mean, I do have like 40 microphones that, date back all the way from my live sound days. Now, a lot of them are 57s, 58s, dynamic microphones for drums and things like that. I do have a ribbon microphone, a U47 clone, and they're all, they're all just really great microphones. But I don't fantasize about microphones so much anymore. I think if I still worked in music, I would probably, or if I were doing a lot more music, I would probably be much more tuned into, what do I want next, and that sort of thing. But it's much harder to get excited about all those different tones when I know I've got something that really works well for me now.
So you don't have gas?
Well, not with microphones now. I actually could get excited about some preamps and things like that. I'd actually be more inclined. I mean, for me, I know it's not the most expensive preamp, and but I love it. And that is the Great River. Great River to me just has such a forward, beautiful, pristine sound, and it's very versatile because it can get kind of dirty and crunchy, but it can also be really crystal clear. So for me, that's kind of the holy grail of preamps, and it's not even the most expensive one. No. But I do love it. I love how it sounds.
Great. Awesome. Right. Thanks for indulging me on that question. All right. So now we're going to get some questions from the audience. And the first one is from Pat Collins, who asks, What mics work best for certain genres of VO? So that's an interesting can of worms question. Who wants to attack that one?
I'll take a stab at that one. There is no right and wrong answer here.
No.
A good mic is a good mic is a good mic, and it's as simple as that. But in terms of what's popular, what's trendy, shotgun mics, specifically the 416, tend to be really popular in the promo world or anywhere where you really want it to cut through, and less desirable in long-form narration, audiobooks, things like that, because it gets a little tiring to listen to. And large diaphragm condensers are good for everything. They're universal. And ribbon mics and a few darker sounding large diaphragm condensers I really like for the long form stuff. They sound a little dull when you first hear them, but after listening to them for a while, they sound really nice. It's pleasant. It's more like somebody sitting next to you talking to you than someone talking at you through a speaker.
Dan, anything to add?
No, I agree with pretty much all of that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I wish I could be more confrontational or controversial.
I know. Why didn't I mean,
why can't we battle it out?
This isn't Facebook. Come on.
Right.
And speaking of Facebook, can I just tell everyone that if Emmett comments on something that you post on a Facebook forum, just listen to what he has to say, because he's almost always right, which is annoying, but it's the case. So just do whatever he says. Okay. So, Anna Clements asks, what are your thoughts on male versus female vocal production qualities, and which models best represent different pitches? I think she means which mics suit certain frequencies, male versus female. I think that's what she was getting at there.
Yeah. I love Anna. Very cool person. Totally dig her. Again, it's really... there's so many other factors involved that, how one microphone sounds in one room can sound completely different on the same person in another room. So I don't put as much, I don't put as much pressure on the microphone in that respect. I really put it more on the environment that you're in. That's just how I feel about it. I mean, certainly, there are mics that are well known to be more, have a lot more high end to them. Others are more dull, things like that. But to me, it still really boils down to the environment when it comes to that, because the same microphone can sound so different in different environments.
Emmett, any thoughts on this?
I don't have much to add except re-stressing the importance of finding the sweet spot for that mic, which is going to be a lot more important than any specific model number. Finding the spot where it really sings and resonates with your voice, which is going to be different with a high-pitched female than a baritone male. But the same mic will work well on both.
Yeah, especially when we're talking about the industry standards anyway. Again, they're standards for a reason.
That's right.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why they tend to come to the fore, because, if a recording studio only has to buy 2 or 3 mics versus 6 or 7, that makes perfect sense. So Chris Sharps, who is our administrator on the Facebook group, he asks, the general trend in VO circles is that you have to have a Neumann TLM 103 or a Sennheiser 416. There are many models that sound amazing and not at those price points. So what mid-range mics would you recommend?
I mentioned earlier the MK4. I think it sounds great.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what mid-range means, but I'm a big fan of the Mojave Audio MA201.
How much is that?
That's about $700 or so.
Okay. That's probably upper mid-range.
Probably. It's a really, really great mic that, frankly, I've got a TLM 103 sitting here. I like the Mojave better. I just bought the Neumann because it's got the Neumann badge on it.
Right.
And I know I'm not the only person who's done that, but I think it's a really, really solid performer. On the other end of the spectrum, the MicTech MK300 is it's quite a head turner, and it's $299, I believe.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, just a terrible logo.
Yes, I can't argue that.
Yeah, I do like the Sennheiser MK4 a lot. I've compared it right up against a 416 and a TLM 103, and it's very similarly voiced to those. It's certainly a little bit more open sounding than the 416, for instance. I think that I haven't heard a newer model one, but Studio Projects C1. It's a little bright on some people and in some situations, but I've heard it sound really good in certain environments, in really well treated environments. So that was just another one that kind of pops to the top of my head that I like a lot.
Yeah, and I'm just going to throw in the Aston Origin. I've been using it recently, and I really like it. It's doesn't have a huge low end response, but I just love the clarity that it brings, and built like a tank. So I can't remember how much they are, 350-ish, something like that.
Looks like a tank too.
Yeah, it does. It's not the prettiest mic in the world, but I really like it. So let's see. Okay, so our next question is from Marisa Blake, who was our guest on last week's episode. And this is a proper geek question, and I know Emmett's just going to be chomping at the bit to answer this one. Why do some people mount their microphones right side up and others upside down?
I saw that question earlier, and you're right. I have been waiting for it.
Yeah, I knew you would be.
There are three good reasons for your mic to be upside down. One of them doesn't really apply anymore, but it's sort of where this trend started. Tube mics, with that tube getting hot, when you would orient them with the diaphragm on top, the heat would rise, and the tube heat would over time just sort of cook that diaphragm.
In theory,
I don't know if it was practical. I've never had it happen, but that's what I've heard, and that was the thinking with flipping it upside down. In a more practical today's type standard, the reason that I keep mine upside down, and I always have, is because I mount it a little bit up towards eye level, and I look at the copy under it, because you tend to hold your copy down and look more downward. The mic doesn't get in your way when you read. The other practical reason is it keeps a little bit of dust off the grill of the microphone, and if it's going to collect somewhere, it collects more on the body. I don't know if there's any other reason beyond that. It's primarily going to be personal preference and what feels good to you with the way you work, the way your booth is set up, the way you stand.
What looks best in selfies?
That too.
Yeah, sightline is one of the biggest reasons, because with the microphone kind of up and pointing down, you're able to focus on your copy, and the microphone isn't interfering with that. Whereas if you have it on a stand, and the stand is, right in front of you, and then the microphone is, that's why I always say get a boom. Get a boom arm on your microphone or on your mic stand, just so you can position it more effectively and efficiently, so that it doesn't interfere with you reading your copy. Anything that is a distraction, anything that doesn't put you in the best frame of mind to do the best job that you can certainly hurt your read, even if it's kind of subconscious.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree. Okay, well, I think that's all of my questions. So do you guys have any final thoughts, Dan?
This was fun.
Yeah.
This was fun. It was great.
I know. We got to do this some more.
Yeah, well, we could probably talk mics for another 3 or 4 hours before we all got bored.
Easily. Yeah, we could all start busting out microphones, and I mean, I think between us, we probably have a pretty good collection of microphones.
Yeah, I would have thought so.
Let's try this one.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you to you both, Dan Friedman and Emmett Andrews. As you say, it's been a really, really fun chat, and if you're a geek, this is like a dream episode, really, because talking microphones, you could do it till the cows come home. So thank you both.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, so there we are. There's our episode that was devoted entirely to one piece of technology. Was that too much? I don't know. I think it's quite a common thing in the voiceover industry to obsess over microphones, so I think that's fair enough to devote an entire episode to it. I think so, anyway. Thank you to Dan and Emmett for their contribution this week, and next week isn't totally locked down yet, so I can't let you know what's coming up, but I will let you know on social media, and you can find all those links on our website, voschoolpodcast.com. But until then, have a good week, and I'll speak to you next time. Thanks very much. Bye. Thank you to this week's guests, to our sponsor J. Michael Collins and Backstage Magazine. Thanks also to Kyle Marie Colucci and Chris Sharps for social media support. Join us next time for another class.